Hello everybody, I'm KC and welcome to an edition of Let's Talk About. Today, let's talk about the Ducktales reboot? Alright. Can I help you?
You don't seem very enthusiastic about this.
Well, that's because I'm not.
But doesn't this just fuel your nostalgia for the original series?
Not really. I never really watched the original Ducktales.
What? Aren't you a 90s kid?
Well, I was born in the 90s, but I'm not sure if that makes me a 90s kid. The definition of that was always kind of vague to me. Also, DuckTales was in the 80s.
So let me get this straight. You're an animation enthusiast.
Yes.
Who's really into Disney.
Yes.
And yet, you've never had any interest in one of our most beloved cartoons?
Not really, no. I don't even know the theme song that well.
Okay, we can make this work. We just have to release something of high quality that'll draw in new fans, not just rely on being a popular property. We can do this. We're not Cartoon Network. All right, My Little Pony, how about this? How about we cast Danny Pudi, who played your favorite character on one of your favorite shows, as one of the nephews?
That's pretty cool, but I don't watch everything he's made.
What if we had Lin-Manuel Miranda in a reoccurring role?
Well, that's pretty exciting, and he seems like he'd be a good voice actor, but I could always just watch his episodes. There's only been like 2 so far, hasn't there?
How about behind the scenes? What if we hired Dana Terrence, who worked on your favorite show of all time, to direct this?
She is very talented, but...
You want to hear more? We got a lot of talented people to sign on to this.
Okay, you know what? Yes, that all sounds very promising, but you're forgetting one little detail, Oswald 2.0. What about Scrooge? Alan Young was the definitive voice for decades, and while characters like Scrooge McDuck have to live on, he will never be replaced and near impossible to follow. Who could you possibly get that would even be half as fitting for the part as he was, that would pique my interest in the slightest?
David Tennant.
Ah, fine. Yeah, strangely enough, despite my affinity for Disney, especially Disney's animated shows, I never really cared about DuckTales. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate DuckTales, it just never grabbed me. The original run was a little before my time, and while I have vague memories of catching it every now and then on Toon Disney, I was more fond of shows like House of Mouse, or Darkwing Duck, or Teacher's Pet. Even when I found out there was this huge nostalgic subculture surrounding it, I still didn't really feel any desire to check it out. So when this reboot was announced, I was ready to just quietly sit on the sidelines and watch the internet rip at a new one regardless of actual quality, simply because it's not the show they grew up with. You know, the usual. But as more promotions came out and as the announcements for who was going to be involved in this were made, I was getting more and more interested in this. Eventually, I got so excited that it was one of my most anticipated pieces of entertainment of 2017. So if you're looking for something that thoroughly compares us to the original and points out every Easter egg and callback, you're not gonna find that here. You should probably stick to someone like Shonakis for that kind of content. Seriously, subscribe to him, he really knows his stuff. But if you want to know how well I think this show holds up as a series in its own right, well, I've been waiting a long time to cover this one, so let's dive right into the Disney money bin that is DuckTales. DuckTales revolves around Donald Duck's troublemaking nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, when they meet their miserly great uncle, Scrooge McDuck, who was once the most adventurous millionaire duck in the world. Which probably isn't a long list, but you get the point. When the kids come into his life, the spark of adventure reignites in Scrooge, and accompanied by the boys and a few other colorful characters, they set out on adventures galore. Sometimes. Other times, they just get into trouble in Duckburg, but it's still fun. From what I can tell, the biggest difference between the original DuckTales and this one is the characterization, and one of the most obvious examples is Huey, Dewey, and Louie. I may not have watched DuckTales, but even I know that these kids were pretty interchangeable. They were the exact same character and have been throughout all of Disneydom. If they were wearing the same color, you'd have no idea who's who. One of the big things they were promoting about the reboot is that they were actually giving them personalities. Huey is a play-by-the-rules nerd, Dewey is the reckless adventurer, Louie is the laid-back schemer. Simple tropes, kind of, but it's a big step up from what they were before, which is basically just 3 mischievous ducks. And that's a characteristic they still share. They've been so sheltered and protected that they're desperate to run around on dangerous adventures, which is the perfect building block for creating a bond with their Uncle Scrooge. I also do like how each of their different personality traits is similar to one of Scrooge's. So each one of them has a way of bonding with their uncle in a unique way. So far, none of them have gone through any major character revelations, but we've still got a ways to go before season 1 concludes. I'm not expecting anything major. Ultimately, giving each of the boys a different personality trait makes way for more diverse stories. Huey has tried to loosen up and confronts the idea that there is still a lot he doesn't know, despite being the smart one, while still trying to prove that he can still know what he's talking about. Even if he's just a kid, he is still clever and resourceful. Dewey has had to think things through instead of charging into a situation, and even digs into certain things deeper than either of his brothers, which has led to a lot of conflicting feelings towards his family. And Louie has had to learn that actions have consequences, and to use the silver tongue for good rather than just trying to find out what's in it for him. Again, nothing groundbreaking so far, but I do think there is a lot of potential, and there have already been some really good moments with these three. While I really like Huey, Dewey probably has the most potential of the three to become very well developed. He clearly has the most insecurities and has definitely had the most focus out of the three, since apparently he's the only character to have appeared in every single episode so far. I honestly like how they portrayed these kids who clearly weren't prepared for what they were getting themselves into, despite being desperate to see the world, handling it the best they can. Webby, on the other hand, again, from what I understand, Webby has also changed quite a bit. Webby is the granddaughter of Scrooge's housekeeper, Mrs. Beakley, who has been pretty much stuck in the mansion her whole life, and is obsessed with him and his family. So she already knew who the boys were when she met them. She's basically the exact opposite of the boys. She's trained in self-defense, knows a ton of myths and legends, speaks multiple languages, and is a lot more capable when going on adventures, but she's also been isolated her whole life, so she's not great in social situations. A lot of people compare her to Mabel from Gravity Falls and even kind of criticize her for that, but I can't say I agree. She shares a few personality traits, like being excitable and sort of silly and random at times, and of course, the grappling hook. But that's about it. Where Mabel was socially adept even to a fault and got along with pretty much everyone, Webby is socially inept and spends more time desperately trying to fit in while still letting her quirks and her thrill for adventure shine. If we're doing character comparison, she's more like a mesh of Dipper from Gravity Falls and Rapunzel from Tangled. Weirdly enough, she's gotten the most of the character-focused episodes so far, and while it may be a little oversaturating, they've all been great appearances. She's a very well-rounded character that I'm sure will only get stronger as the show goes on. Also, her overzealous and extreme ways of approaching things has provided most of the comedy so far, and I gotta say, I'm really loving it. I am very much looking forward to the day we get a Webby and Scrooge focused episode. Launchpad is fine. Sometimes he's funny, sometimes he's not. Among so many great characters, while Launchpad could be funny, I wasn't quite sure where his place was in the show, what he had to offer as a character. But after the episode, Beware the Buddy System, I think I've got it. Launchpad is the sentimental one. He is loyal and positive to a fault. He'll do anything for Scrooge and his family, even if he's not very good at his appointed tasks. He might get panicky at times, but he usually has a smile on even in the worst of times. He acts before he has time to think it through, ready to jump into any situation if it means helping his friends. While I still don't think he's one of the strongest characters of the bunch, if my track record proves anything, it's not to judge the comic relief character too quickly. Time will tell, but I've already grown more fond of Launchpad since the season has progressed, and I say that's a good sign. Donald has some interesting changes. On the surface, he's still the short-tempered, smug, Murphy's Law attracting duck that we all know and love, and it's just as funny as it has been for the last several decades, but where things get interesting is his connections to his family. Donald is very overprotective when it comes to the boys. Sometimes it's played for laughs, like most of his personality traits, but while the boys do feel suffocated by their uncle's constant watchful eye, it's clear he's doing it because he cares, and not just to get a laugh out of the audience at his expense. Donald is Disney's punching bag, so it would have been very easy to go down the route of making his overprotective nature annoying for the sake of comedy. We see this kind of thing all the time in cartoons. But you can tell that this is a very deeply rooted part of him in this show. That he not only acts like this because he clearly cares about them, but there's also some fear deep inside him. This has only been hinted at once or twice since the first episode, but it shouldn't have to be outright said. You should just be able to tell from a character's actions, and they do this wonderfully with Donald. And last but most certainly not least, Scrooge McDuck. Scrooge is probably the most interesting character so far, and definitely my favorite of the group. While the show seems to focus on and revolve around the kids the most, anytime Scrooge gets screen time, he owns the scene. When we first meet him, he's the cantankerous, grumpy old miser that we expect him to be, given his namesake, but that doesn't last for long. It's revealed that Scrooge used to be a big deal, a world-class treasure hunter and globe-trotting adventurer, but something happened. We still don't know what, but even if he gave it up and has become somewhat complacent with just running his company, he's not washed up. At the first sign of trouble, he confidently jumps into action with a sharp wit and a spry move or two, which is pretty damn impressive given that not only has he been out of the game for so long, but he may be over 100.
When I was prospecting for my fortune in the Klondike. Gold Rush? Wait, how old are you?
I especially like how they emphasize that Scrooge had to work hard and develop muscle to do his signature money dive. There are times when it's even come in handy during adventures. It's almost like his superpower. I just love his passion and excitement for each adventure, and after their first little exploit, he really takes a liking to the kids and finds someone to share that passion with. It's almost like watching him relive all the exciting adventures he had with Donald back in the day. However, while Scrooge is much more encouraging and responsible than I thought he'd be, he's not perfect. While he is still cheap, though that hasn't really caused any major problems yet, Scrooge's biggest conflicts as a character come from pride. Yes, he is the most experienced of the group, and sometimes it's fun to see how confident he is compared to some of his competition, but that doesn't mean he knows everything. Some of the globetrotting episodes they've had show Scrooge taking the lead and not willing to listen to kids because he's the experienced one, he knows what he's doing, and he's always right. The episodes Impossible Summit of Mount Everest and The Missing Links of Moorshire are probably the best examples of this, showing that while the kids have a long way to go in terms of being real adventurers, Scrooge is taking them along on these journeys for a reason. And while it takes time for him to put his pride aside and let someone else step up to the plate, the moment when it comes is very heartfelt. Maybe it comes from his own ego or from whatever happened in the past that made him so secluded, but the walls around Scrooge's pride and cynicism are slowly being knocked down by the pride he has in his nephews. And it's become one of the most endearing aspects of the show. But the odd thing is that Scrooge hasn't had much focus yet, at least not as much as you might think. In fact, some episodes seem to go out of their way to not include him, and only very recently has he gotten his own focus episodes. The first half of the season before the hiatus had this weird structure where Scrooge would disappear for long stretches, the family would hardly leave Duckburg, and there was a lot of focus on Webby. Now apparently this was because Disney aired the first 10 episodes massively out of order, with certain plot points being revisited way sooner than they were planned, and the balance between what adventures and characters were focused on was really thrown off. This explained a lot, and for the sake of this review, I did rewatch everything in the correct order, and it does flow a lot better. It's pretty even as far as what characters get the spotlight, and it's pretty much back and forth on globetrotting and hometown adventures. It's a lot smoother, and I really wish Disney had aired the episodes in the correct order, but they kind of have a history with stuff like this, especially with trying to get episodes out that fit certain holidays. Milo Murphy's Law also suffered from this recently. Let's just be glad nothing like that ever happened to Gravity Falls. Anyway, while it is still weird that Scrooge hasn't gotten that much attention, with a cast as eccentric and as large as this, what's replacing that is still good. And Scrooge's involvement seems to have become more balanced as the show has gone on. The show is split into big adventure-style episodes and more down-to-earth slice-of-life stories, like pretty much every other modern cartoon. And while I'm personally in this show for the exciting world-building adventures, the episodes in Duckburg aren't bad by any means, and have gotten much more exciting in the second half of the season. The adventure episodes are full of exotic locations like the Grand City of Macaw, Mount Everest, and Ithaquack, I love these names, filled with entertaining and creative creatures. I especially loved Ithaquack and their take on some of the Greek myths. And it gets extra points for Huey's reaction to all of it being the perfect representation of how a preteen geek would react to meeting the Greek gods.
Dare defy the will of Zeus?
The king of the gods, get out! The myths are real! This place is amazing!
But even though we've had more adventures in Duckburg so far, they keep those just as fun and interesting with a huge cast of memorable reoccurring characters. From friends and allies like the full-of-himself inventor Gyro Gearloose and his intern Fenton Crackshell Cabrera, who we'll get back to the staff at McDuck Manor like Mrs. Beakley, who is awesome and takes no crap from anyone and may or may not be a spy. And the recent appearance of Duckworth, who's a ghost. And judging by how that episode ends, it looks like he's just sticking around. They just have a ghost hanging around the mansion and serving them now. On a side note, I found out that Duckworth is voiced by the same guy who plays Jarvis in Avengers Assembled, and I thought that was funny, which is the only reason I brought him up. Then there's the reoccurring villains, who are mostly around during the Duckburg episodes, which makes those stories even better. With the rise of major story arcs and ongoing mysteries in cartoons, villains that show up constantly to antagonize in a never-ending rotation seem to be a dying story device. And while Ducktales certainly has some reoccurring story arcs, this is something I really enjoy about the show so far. Whether they are returning characters from the old show or brand new villains, even if there's only a dozen or so episodes so far, DuckTales Rogues Gallery is already pretty large and wildly entertaining, especially Glomgold. I have no idea if this is an accurate interpretation of Glomgold, but it's hilarious and I love it. Now this may be an abrupt turn to make, but before I move into the big mysteries in the show, I want to take some time to talk about the production design, starting with the animation, which is one of the most instantly appealing things about the show. I would say something like, this breaks from the dreaded CalArt style that plagues modern animated shows, but as Channel Frederator elegantly pointed out in their video, CalArt style doesn't exist. So I'll call it what it is, stylized and distinct. DuckTales is definitely a show that knows the history of his characters and draws inspiration from the Duck legacy, for lack of a better word, in any way it can, using Scrooge McDuck's early days as a comic book series as inspiration for its style. The backgrounds have layering that look like old comic book inking, and both the theme song and the credits use comic panels for transitions, which thankfully doesn't carry over into the show itself, but for the show's bookends, it's a cute homage. The character designs are more angular and unique than the original series, which seems to just stick to the original Disney style, and while that's fine, it can be difficult when you're working with a cast that, for the most part, are all the same species. From what I've seen, some of them can start looking the same very quickly, but the reboot really avoids that trap, giving each character distinct features, whether it's very different body types, wardrobe choices, or even very subtle ones like different tail feathers. All of this adds up to make each character stand out. It's quite an attention to detail. And the animation itself is very smooth, with dynamic movements and facial expressions, and pretty atmospheric when it comes to things like shading. All of these elements blend together to create something truly eye-popping that really grabs your attention. But the animation is only half the presentation in an animated show. There's also the voice actors. The main cast was even revealed in their own video months before the series premiered, most of whom were played by well-known comedians and other talented performers. But I remember some people not being crazy about the casting choices of Huey, Dewey, and Louie, played by Danny Pudi, Ben Schwartz, and Bobby Moynihan respectively, and on some level I get it. It's such a drastic change from the boys' classic Donald-like voices, and something that bothered some people was that they weren't voiced by actual kids. But after hearing them in the show properly, I think they were great choices for the boys, and deliver the laughs and even the heartfelt moments really well. I find it a bit tough to recognize their voices most of the time, especially Schwartz's. And while I am totally on board with hiring kids to play kids, this isn't Avatar. It's very likely the kids aren't going to age much in this show, and for boys especially, I get wanting to stick with older actors. And the rest of the main cast is excellent. I think Beck Bennett is a great successor to Launchpad's original voice actor. Kate Micucci was perfect for Webby's huge personality, and has proven herself a very capable voice actor in a short amount of time. Mrs. Beakley's no-nonsense attitude is portrayed wonderfully by Olagundoy? I really hope that's right. Donald is... well, he's Donald. It's the same guy who's been playing him for the last 30 years. Tony Anselmo goes all the way back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And Scrooge McDuck, as pointed out by the mouse at the beginning, is played by none other than David Tennant.
Rectamundo, a word I have never used before and hopefully never will again.
Some of you might have heard of him. Before this announcement, recasting Scrooge was something I was very concerned about. I don't know if Alan Young was planned to have any involvement before his passing, and I know Scrooge has been portrayed by other fine actors, but he had become so synonymous with the character to me that I wasn't sure how they could possibly pick a worthy successor so quickly. And then they made one of the most perfect casting choices in the history of modern animation. Disregarding his standing in geek culture for a second, Tennant was such an obvious choice that I can't believe I didn't consider. The man just bursts with charisma, but can have a darker, more crotchety side to him. He has quite a bit of voice acting experience under his belt already, and most surprisingly of all for a Scrooge McDuck voice actor, he's actually Scottish.
I'm Dr. James McCrimmon from the township of Balamory.
What? You're lucky I've only used 2 Doctor Who clips so far. I'm being restrained. While it took me an episode or 2 to hear Scrooge and not just David Tennant having a blast behind a mic, I fully embraced it. As far as I'm concerned, he makes the role his own, while at the same time being the most worthy successor to the late great Alan Young imaginable. Now if he could just get some more screen time, that'd be awesome. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. DuckTales is accompanied by an exceptional ensemble cast. Keith Ferguson, Paul F. Tompkins, Josh Brenner, Jim Rash, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Allison Janney, and so many others bring such amazing life to already entertaining characters. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some certain guest voice actors that appeared recently.
Greetings! We're Briar and Bramble, the keepers of this realm. Bet you're all wondering what this place is.
Yes, it's pretty funny that they got Tara Strong and Andrea Libman to play pastel-colored ponies, and they are very hilarious as these things. But real talk, how have we not had Kelpies in My Little Pony yet? We've got changelings and sirens. Seems like the next logical step. Anyway, like so many other shows on nowadays, DuckTales doesn't just focus on self-contained adventures, it has a few underlying mysteries. Some have just been short setup for future episodes, while others have gotten more expansive. From the shadiness of Mark Beeks in the beginning of the origins of Gizmo Duck, to Webby's new friend Lena and her conspiring with her Aunt Magica to spell. Which, by the way guys, did you know that Magica is played by Catherine Tate? I can't imagine how she got that role. And of course, the one that made everyone's jaws drop.
Mom?
This was huge. People lost their minds. I lost my mind. Not only did this show acknowledge that these kids had a mother, but they were actually going to go into why she isn't around, which is apparently connected to why Scrooge and Donald became so estranged and stopped adventuring. Naturally, what happened to Della Duck has been speculated on wildly by fans, and I've been surprised that there's already been a couple of episodes dedicated to gathering more info, how Dewey feels about this mystery surrounding his mother, and even already disproving a theory or two, which has led to even more theories. We're still in season 1, and it's amazing what the roller coaster of speculation has already become. Not only that, but since this isn't the only mystery and ongoing story in the show, it gives us even more to get invested in and excited about. Time will tell how well the show balances having several ongoing arcs, but so far, it's been very well executed. And I cannot wait to see how much bigger and more exciting these adventures get in the future. Overall, DuckTales 2017 isn't perfect, and it's not the next Gravity Falls, but as far as I'm concerned, it's definitely a contender to repeat history and become Disney's new flagship show. I think its only competition at the moment is Star vs. the Force of Evil, and I'm really behind on that show, so I can't really vouch for it, but I know it's good. As someone who didn't grow up with the original series, I found this show to be very entertaining, immensely creative, filled with diverse, eccentric characters and intriguing story elements, with a sense of the vast history that inspired it. While some episodes can be a slow burn, none have been bad. There's always some fun to be had, and I think it's only gotten better as it's gone on. I am fully invested in DuckTales 2017, and I look forward to see how this reboot rewrites history with every new mystery. And with that, it's time to reveal my Like I said, the show has gotten a lot better as it's gone on, and this review has taken a long time to actually get done, so my favorite episode has changed a lot over the past couple of months, and it might have changed once this actually goes up. But at the moment, my pick would definitely be Beware the Buddy System. The story is one of the most fun Duckburg-based episodes. It made me understand Launchpad a bit more and maybe enjoy him as a character, and this episode debuted Lin-Manuel Miranda as none other than Gizmo Duck.
I am not throwing away my shot. I am not throwing away my shot. I am
Fenton Crackshell Cabrera.
I am not throwing away my shot.
Oh, come on, you knew that was coming. I don't know why, but I was really anticipating the debut of Gizmo Duck. Maybe because Lin-Manuel Miranda is a talented performer and turns out a pretty good voice actor. Or maybe it's because even though I'm not a fan of the original DuckTales, I always thought Gizmo Duck looked pretty cool. I even have this little action figure of him that I got for 50 cents at a local toy store not long after the reboot started. And after all that hype, one hero would have been enough to make this great, but then the episode decided to open with,
I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the lone roller skate at the base of villainy staircase. I am Darkwing Duck.
This was awesome! I was speechless! I got chills! Or I would have if this hadn't been leaked early. Seriously, what is with all these leaks in cartoons lately? But still, this is such a cool return and homage to Darkwing Duck, and it is great to hear Jim Cummings in the part again. As for it being an in-universe TV show, I thought it was a fun idea, but I also don't think it means this is the last we've seen of DW. And because this is getting ridiculously long, I'll elaborate more on Darkwing when he inevitably returns. So after all this, what now? As far as Let's Talk About goes, DuckTales will be joining the likes of My Little Pony and Doctor Who. I'll cover individual episodes when I feel I have something interesting to say about them, or if I have time. And given that we are creeping closer and closer to the season 1 finale, I'm sure the adventures of these iconic feather-tailed travelers will only get crazier. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.